Speaksies.
All right, so dude, I'm in a really good mood. You know, we talk about a little bit how 2020, we kind of got tired of hearing how it was the worst year ever.
Right.
So been trying to keep it positive. This morning, found out some really good news.
Excellent.
Caillou is canceled. Do you know what Caillou is?
Is that a rapper? Did he say something bad on Twitter?
No. Okay, so not canceled in that way.
Oh, okay.
It's not Lil Caillou. It's Caillou. Oh, God. Just even saying his name brings up a rage within my belly. But I know I'm supposed to be, this is positive.
That's right.
Caillou has been around for about 20 years. If you're a parent, you may have accidentally, if you heard like some little kid whining, it was probably Caillou. He has an insufferable theme song, which is in my head right now, and I'm not going to sing it or anything.
Thank you.
But anyway, it's about this kid, this bald kid. He's like a knockoff Charlie Brown.
Okay.
You may have seen him.
The image is starting to click with me.
Yeah, just this bald kid. And it is weird because he's not a baby. He can talk. He's like walking around, but he's super bald. But you know, it is Charlie Brown, but it's not endearing in any the ways Charlie Brown was.
Okay.
And I realized when my kids were young that they were learning to whine by listening to Caillou.
Oh my God.
Because you'd hear, I'd be in the other room. I'd have, you know, PBS, because it's like a PBS show. So we'd have PBS Kids on, and you'd hear, I don't want to go to play school. And I'm like, what? Who is this kid? Like, they must be teaching, like, not to whine. But the kids, the parents are like the bitch of this kid. Like, the parents are like, what's wrong, Caillou? You don't want to go to play school today? I'm just not feeling it today. I'm serious.
Wow.
Matter of fact, in the theme song, it says, I won't sing it, but he says something about life is not so tough except when I've had enough. It's like some little sassy kid saying he's just had enough.
Oh my gosh.
It's bad. Also, as far as I can tell, and I did watch this a while before I banned it in the house, nobody has nipples. The kid doesn't have nipples. The dad doesn't have nipples.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't say Google Caillou's nipples, but if you just Google Caillou, you'll see this. But anyway,
or maybe Google Bobby Flay's nipples first, and then do Caillou's nipples. So now that you've said this, you're actually bringing out a memory of. I remember when your oldest child is older than my only child, and I think you gave me a heads up on this show. You warned me off to keep an eye out for this show because it'll get in your house and teach your kid to whine.
Yeah, exactly. And I heard it this morning. I was listening to the Adam Carolla podcast, and he said he had to be talked out of leading the show with this. And by the way, I didn't get the hate from Caillou from Adam Carolla. I hated this organically.
Good for you.
And then I Googled it just to make sure it was true. And of course, all the headlines are like, parents are thrilled to see Caillou canceled. The disappointing thing about Caillou, too, is that it's a Canadian show. And I feel like most of our imports from Canada are pretty great. Like, I mean, I love it. Pretty much everything. The comedians, I mean, half the time when there's some awesome actor or comedian, you find out he's Canadian, you're like, I knew it.
Right.
Canadians are awesome. Canadian beer's great, a lot of stuff. But Caillou, whew.
Well, they all can't be winners. So I guess that's, the lesson from that, from our northern hat.
And it makes me feel really good that you don't know any of this stuff. And then if I had something to do with that, you should
happy. Feel good about that. Thank you from keeping that from me.
Yeah. So Steve, what are we doing tonight? Now that I've brought the show to the level of talking about a cartoon nipples, I feel like we can only go.
We can only go up, I think, or we'll see. So we're going to discuss a word. Actually, we're going to do one full episode on a word.
Yes. That
I found on a list, and I thought it would be a very, something to partner with some other words. But I went on a journey.
We had a journey, a Steve journey.
I like to go on a Steve journey. So the word is actually assassin.
Okay.
So I always thought the word assassin was simply a word for a person that commits an assassination, somebody that kills a political or religious figure.
Right.
But it's much more than that. As we explore the history of the word assassin, we're going to see that the word derives from an actual group of people called assassins, a religious sect that arose at the time of the Crusades. We're learning the history of that group and how their methods and actions created the word that we associate with killing a leader of some sort.
Gotcha. So it's not just a word that describes killing a person. It was a group.
It was a group.
That's cool. This is going to be cool.
So we're going to go on a journey. We're going to go to the land of Persia. We're going to see some battles against the Mongols. We're going to learn about the juice drink Snapple, a fictional martial art from Korea, William Shakespeare, and perhaps most importantly, the fact I don't want to leave out, one of the things that's great about Assassins is the word ass is in it twice.
Yes, it is.
7th grade Steve would feel bad if he didn't call that out.
I've been thinking about it since you said the word.
Yeah.
So.
And it's how I remember how to spell it too.
Yeah.
So a little hint for all our listeners who maybe didn't learn how to spell on Caillou. They can learn from this. Yeah. So to keep us going, we're going to start out not just at any dictionary. We're starting out at the OED.
Ooh, okay, good. I was getting tired of Merriam-Webster.
Well, Merriam-Webster, we'll give them credit for at least being free. This was one of those OED articles I somehow found, slipped through the paywall.
That's the best. Usually I get the first, little bit of it, and then it starts getting real good, and I'm like, $1.99.
Yeah, and even though that we, do have a podcast that focuses on the history of words and phrases, I don't feel like paying the OED subscription. They'll be okay. That Disney bundle saved me some money, but not that much.
Right.
So starting with the OED, I'm going to start with the second definition.
By the way, thank you for picking up this coffee on the way over here. Appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I mean, for the cost of a cup of coffee, we could have the OED subscription.
Actually, I think it's pretty steep.
Oh.
We're talking Netflix or HBO Max.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for the coffee anyway.
You're welcome. And if anyone wants to help us subscribe to the OED, become a Speaksies supporter at patreon.com/Speaksies.
For the cost of about 3 or 4 cups of coffee, you can put us on the OED.
OED. So going back to the OED, they give 2 definitions. I'm going to go with the second one first. The second definition is a person who murders another, especially a prominent public figure, in a planned attack, typically with a political or ideological motive. Also, more generally, a hired or professional killer.
Like Jason Bourne.
Yeah, but that's definition number 2. So.
Oh, yeah, you did say that's number 2.
That's right. So this is definition number 1.
Bring it.
Reading from the OED. Offensive, period. Usually with a capital initial. A member of the Nizari sect of the Ismaili branch of Islam, which was founded by Hassan-i-Sabbah in the late 11th century, and was renowned for murdering political and religious adversaries. So a few weeks ago, we did some terms that have some negative racial connotations to them, and we did some denunciations leading up to that to cover ourselves. And, I think we would be remiss if we ignored the jihad in the room.
Yeah.
Of when you think of people who hold grudges or get offended easily, the religion of peace is way up there. But I'm fairly confident, as long as we don't say anything like, we should be fine. So as long as I don't say anything like that, we'll be good.
Yeah, don't say that.
Continuing, going to enemonline.com, and their definition, listed as originating in the 1530s via medieval French and Italian, the word assassini, from the Arabic hashishin, an Arabic nickname for the Nizari Ismaili sect in the Middle East during the Crusades, plural of hashishavi, from the source of hashish.
Dude, you just nailed that pronunciation. Good job.
Probably.
No, you killed it.
They were a fanatical Muslim sect in the mountains of Lebanon at the time of the Crusades, under the leadership of the Old Man of the Mountains. In Western European minds, they had a reputation for murdering opposing leaders after intoxicating themselves by eating hashish. But there is no evidence that the medieval Ismailis used hashish. So that gets to one of the reasons why that this is the number 1 definition is listed as offensive.
Offensive, right.
That the rumors of them taking drugs and hashish to get in the mood to murder people seems to be more of an embellishment, and we'll get later
so
where that comes from.
Wait a minute. We don't want to offend the descendants of these murdering tribes of...
This isn't to protect ourselves. This is when people were denigrating it back in the day.
I know, but I'm just laughing about the fact that, well, maybe I didn't know that, but I just mean, it's like these guys are murdering people that were led by an old man in the mountains or whatever. Right. But we did not smoke hashish before we murdered people, because it's almost better if it's like, hey, we were all messed up. Like,
right. Well, it kind of gets to some of the mythology you're going to see around this group, and after they're skilled. I mean, they were so good at being assassins that the name sticks. Mm-hmm. But again, also, as we talked about, Muslims are like the Alabama Crimson Tide of holding grudges. So I could see why that comes, hashtag Roll Jihad. So for some more facts about who the assassins were, we go to ancient.eu. The assassins were Nizrali Ismailis, a group of Shiite Muslims who were powerful in Persian Syria from the 11th century until their defeat at the hands of the Mongols in the mid-13th century. It's a good 200-year plus run.
It's a good run, and it's like there's no shame in losing to the Mongols. Everybody lost at one point or another to the Mongols. I think.
It is. It's like when you play Clemson or something like that. You're gonna, you want to hang in there. Yep. But again, we are talking about the Crimson Tide of the Middle East.
I know. Here. I was thinking it too.
So the group became known as assassins by their enemies in reference to their use of hashish, with assassin being a corruption of the term for hashish. So the name continues to stick today, as also Nizari Ismailis still exist today. So they got that going for them.
I bet they're much tamer now, right? It's probably like the Masons or something.
Well, we'll find out. Ooh. If they get this, we'll know.
Oh, right. Yeah, if they listen to this. We do get downloads in the Middle East, by the way.
Very good. Nothing bad can come from that.
No.
Continuing from ancient.eu, the assassins did not enjoy great military strength, so their strategy of targeting specific and powerful opponents was a good one.
Yeah.
The weapon of choice for assassination was almost always the knife, and the missions were usually carried out by a small team, sometimes in disguise as beggars, ascetics, or monks.
It's pretty cool. By the way, the monk, the whole idea of like the fighter monk, is pretty sweet.
It is, and it's almost like kind of Middle Eastern ninjas. You see the same sort of like thing.
Yeah.
And I think too, not to harp on it too much with the hashish, but I could see like this just kind of legend of these guys that like float in and out and you can't catch them.
Right. Yeah, just like the ninjas. The other thing I like is that they talk about the main weapon they use is a knife, but I'm also like, this was like 1100. Yeah. I don't know how it's like a knife or a club, or what were you going to use? It wasn't like not going to use the sniper rifle.
There weren't too many options there, but maybe,
it is cool though. The idea of,
I could see them though maximizing use of that knife. Also, something they maximized was carrying out the execution in a crowded location to maximize the political and religious consequences of the act.
Right.
In keeping with a tradition, the assassins were not expected to survive their mission and were known as Fadai, or suicide commandos. So I'll just let that go from there.
Yeah.
So to the old man of the mountain, it was a term that I've actually heard before. I've never heard it in context of this, but where does that come from? It comes from Marco Polo. So he helped popularize assassins and also the legends that go with it in his travels, an account of his adventures across Asia. And quoting from that, the old man was called in their language Aladdin. In a beautiful valley enclosed between two lofty mountains, he had formed a luxurious garden stormed with every delicious fruit and every fragrant shrub that could be procured.
I love this description because, again, it's like nowadays you'd have a big house with flat screen TVs. It's like the most fragrant shrubs is like the nicest thing that, I'm not trying to make fun of them, but it's just kind of funny to hear.
I like it, but it's giving me a vibe of, it's giving me a little bit of a Brad Wesley vibe here. So maybe the old man in the mountains, maybe that's what the origin of Roadhouse was.
I can see it.
But I digress slightly. So why were they so loyal to the old man in the mountain? Hash probably didn't help, but he would tell them, he would encourage them with phrases like this, again, quoting from Marco Polo. We have the assurances of our prophet that he who defends his Lord shall inherit paradise. And if you show yourselves devoted to the obedience of my orders, that happy lot awaits you.
I hope this doesn't get me in trouble with any of our, with anyone. But the old man of the mountain is starting to sound a little bit too like Charles Manson. He's just kind of saying stuff. He probably is selling them hash, and it's just going, yeah, man, go do this, that, and the other, and you'll get spices. And I mean, it's probably coming from holy text or something, but it sounds a little Manson-y to me. Because is he out doing the work, or is he just back at his fragrant bushes?
Well, you know what? He's not.
See?
He is out there sending out people to do his dirty work for him.
Yep.
So what was some of the dirty work that the assassins did that made them so famous? So some of their notable assassinations. 1, Conrad
Baines, the dad from...
Oh, what if they did? I think he's still alive.
He probably is, because he looked like he was 70 in the show in Different Strokes, but he was probably like 40.
So one very notable victim was Conrad of Montferrat, the king of Jerusalem.
There was a king of Jerusalem named Conrad.
There was.
I didn't read about him in the Old Testament.
He was stabbed by a double team of assassins one night as he walked home from dinner. The assassins had disguised as monks and had caught Conrad off guard by showing him a letter before fatally stabbing him. Richard I, the Lion-Hearted of England, was accused by his detractors of even paying for the deed. But no one has ever come to agree that that was true. So
I like the old read this letter trick.
Yeah, it's a good one.
Read this letter while I stab you.
But if a monk comes up to you and asks you to do that, I could see that not being an issue. So as we talked about, the assassins had a good run, but all good runs come to an end, especially when you cross the Mongols.
Yeah.
So they didn't cross just any Mongol. They crossed the youngest son of Genghis Khan, Monkey Kong.
No.
Not Donkey Kong, Monkey Kong.
Really?
Yes. So maybe I should have researched this before we did our history of Nintendo.
I was thinking the same thing. This could, we had all those different origins of Donkey Kong.
So Monkey Kong was given an order to go campaign and expand his empire in the West. He did so with great success, and on the way he defeated the assassins in 1256 by taking their previously thought impregnable castles one by one. The assassins had made one big mistake, and they did one of their infamous hits on a Mongol commander, and that didn't go over so well with the Mongols. Yeah. It might work to intimidate some other people.
Yeah. Mongols don't care. They're not going to be scared. They're going to come find you in your fortress.
Yeah. So at that time, the Mongols took all the castles. They captured the Grandmaster, whose name I cannot pronounce and will not try to. I don't think he was the original Old Man in the Mountains.
Yeah.
He would really be old by this point.
Right.
But Monkey took the leader, took him to the Mongol capital for an audience, then refused to see him, and finally had him executed while traveling on his way home, trampled to death by his guards. So this was one of those special deaths they gave you to, first we're going to be rude to you, and then we're going to step all over you.
Well, I don't know if you've ever listened to any of Dan Carlin's Hardcore History. He has one called King of Kings, and it's all about like the old Persians and biblical time stuff. And like they did this all the time. They would do things like this where, well, part of it is they don't know whether some of it is embellished by the lack of written record. But by the time the written record would come, there'd always be this thing of like they humiliated the guy, or like they killed the family in front of him and then made him walk up. There's all these really diabolical deaths. But it does sound like they took it up a notch. They're like, oh, you like to instill fear in people by doing this type of stuff, making a display. Like, okay, we're the Mongols.
Yeah.
We're going to kick it up a notch and
we're going to do it and do it better.
Yep.
So,
insult you and then kill you on the way home.
It's good to see the power of competition there. Try to one up each other.
Yeah. Some friendly murder competition.
Yeah. Looking back at the legacy of the assassins, medieval assassins may be long gone, but again, Nizari Ismailis continue as a branch of Shiite Islam. Their current leader, or Imam, is named Prince Shah Karim al-Husseini. Many of the Ismaili ruined castles can still be seen if you're keen enough to go out there and explore in that area to find them.
That'd be pretty cool.
And the sect has also gained a whole new level of awareness thanks to the 2007 video game Assassin's Creed and its various sequels, which are loosely based on Nizari Ismailis.
Well, I have never played Assassin's Creed, but I will tell you, I feel kind of conflicted about this because as video games get more realistic, it feels more like you're actually doing something wrong. I remember the first time where it was like, this is really messed up was Grand Theft Auto. You remember that?
Yeah.
Back when that came out, it was like, oh, this is jacked up. But I love playing Skyrim, and there's basically you get into this mode where you can be part of the Dark Brotherhood, and you're an assassin, and it is just so fun and satisfying. You get your bow and arrow or your knife or whatever it is, and you're going all over the world finding targets and killing them. And it's wrong. Killing is wrong, but it feels so right when you do it on a video game. It's pretty satisfying to just get a arrow right through some target, and you don't even know who you're killing half the time. But anyway, now I'm starting to tell myself how much I enjoy this. But
so now we know where the word assassin came from.
Yep.
But how did it get into the English lexicon? So this word is often attributed to being introduced to English by William Shakespeare.
Oh.
Which is not entirely true.
Yeah.
I think that the prominence of the word was probably due to Shakespeare.
Mm-hmm.
He uses it in Macbeth, and I shall read it for you. If it were done when 'tis done, then 'twere well it be done quickly, if the assassination could trammel up the consequence and catch with his surcease success. We also see why I'm not an actor or a Shakespearean performer. So where that term is used in Macbeth, part of the reason that people think it came from Shakespeare is due to Snapple.
Okay, you got to explain this one.
So do you remember Snapple?
Yes. Snapple was a big deal in the 90s.
They were like one of the first, like, it wasn't juice, it was classier than juice. Because I remember they had teas, but they also had, I think, different bottled juices.
Yeah, Snapple hit this interesting intersection, like you said, of like, it was, you remember like back then you had Arizona Iced Tea kind of came out around that time, but I always thought Arizona Iced Tea was a little, I don't know, trashy. It wasn't that classy.
Because it was prominently displayed at every 7-Eleven.
Yeah.
So that's probably,
and it was like a 40 ounce of sweet tea or whatever, or tea with like botanical flavors and stuff. Never a big fan. You had, of course, your classic juice, and then you had, to me, which is the MVP, is Clearly Canadian.
Thank you.
Which I did find, by the way.
I saw it the other day, too. Where did you see it at?
World Market.
That's where I saw it.
Are you serious?
Yeah, I'm not kidding. So that was my preferred when water wasn't good enough for me, but I really didn't want a soda. I wanted something in between with maybe a hint of fruit. Oh, Clearly Canadian. So I have some good 90s.
Yes. But Snapple, well, what I remember about Snapple is that I feel like your dad was a Snapple fan. Is that weird? I talk about your dad a lot in this podcast, but
no,
I remember
him. So. I think there was also a radio program he listened to frequently that promoted that, and I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah.
And that might have some influence on Snapple being around.
What in the world did this have to do with Shakespeare?
Well, I'll tell you. And we're going to go to our friends at Merriam-Webster.
I kind of trashed them earlier.
It's
Sorry,
okay.
Guys.
Listen, they're not the OED. They know that.
Yeah.
They also know that they're not clearly Canadian to...
No, they're the Snapple.
They're the Snapple of dictionaries. So in an article, words Shakespeare didn't invent, they point to this false information being out there to Snapple facts that were listed on the cap of Snapple beverages.
Yeah, I remember those.
So quoting from Merriam-Webster, quoting from the Snapple real fact listed on Merriam-Webster, real fact 807, Shakespeare invented the word assassination and bump.
Okay, first of all, how do they get away with that? They just say that he invented the word assassination, and then they pair it with the word bump.
Bump. So I did not follow up to see if bump was true, and maybe I was thinking I'd talk to Barry Popick about this, but he's definitely a clearly Canadian guy. I don't want to insult him
I know.
by bringing up that. So Merriam-Webster does point out, though, that the first time it was used in English was by Sir Thomas Smith in his letter to Dr. Wilson, where he writes, "But where all treason, conspiracy, insurrection, assassination, empoisonment, and utter destruction to the state is meant." And I did actually pronounce the word correctly, empoisonment.
Empoisonment?
Empoisonment.
Oh, empoisonment. Okay.
Yes. So we will look that up.
It sounds like a fake word that Snapple made
It does. It probably is from Sir Thomas Smith's letter to Snapple.
So, okay, this guy, and I think we see this a lot where that's why Shakespeare comes up so much, is that he didn't necessarily, coin the word, but helped popularize it because he was Shakespeare.
Because he's Shakespeare, and he's definitely
they were Shakespeare.
Oh, it sounds like They Walk Among Us for the future. So, how did the term assassin or assassination become in the lexicon? Help from Shakespeare.
Yeah.
However, he did not create the word.
Okay.
Despite what Snapple says.
I really want to clear the Canadian right now. That's my big takeaway from this.
Maybe they should be our next sponsor.
I should have bought at least one the other day, but I was being cheap. All right, well, this is fascinating. So speaking of They Walk Among Us, our conspiracy theory segment, we're going to go ahead and jump into that right now. Conspiracy theories.
Conspiracy theories.
There's a secret society of the 5 wealthiest people in the world known as the Pentaverate.
We know differently. And here's David Stern with the announcement.
Pick, select Patrick Ewing.
Who run everything in the world.
I don't like them putting chemicals in the water that turn the friggin' frogs gay.
The Queen, the Vatican, the Gettys, the Rothschilds, and Colonel Sanders before he went tits up.
They walk among us.
All right, so Steve, do you have a favorite Beatles album?
I do have a favorite Beatles album. I would say it's actually the White Album, or I think it's correctly called The Beatles.
The Beatles, yeah. Yeah, love it. That's one I listen to I probably listen to more than any other, just because of my kids. It's a good one to introduce your kids to the Beatles if you're that kind of guy that's like, my kids have to listen to the Beatles. We put on the White Album because it's got all different sorts of things. So the White Album is going to come up here. So what about favorite Beatle? Do you have a favorite Beatle?
You know what? I don't necessarily have one. I can tell you who my least favorite Beatle is.
Please.
It's John Lennon. That the older I've become, the more I read about him, and the more I see him, I realize what a jackass he was. Yeah. And he does not seem to be a very pleasant person to be with. No. There's a documentary that will be coming out soon, directed by Peter Jackson.
Oh, really?
That has some footage of the Beatles that I've never seen. They showed a preview of it recently on Disney Plus. And I think it's called Get Back. It's during the Get Back recording sessions, and you see them there recording, and then for no reason, there's Yoko Ono just sitting there, and like I saw her, and I just, I think that sometimes people get a bad reputation and don't deserve it. She is not one of those people. You could just see her as the girlfriend in the way, has no business being there. Anyway,
there's a reason that her name comes up whenever a band is going to break up or a partnership.
Yeah, but John Lennon seems to be just a jerk.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, obviously, he's an amazing talent and everything, but I would actually agree with you. He is not my favorite either. He's down there. So my favorite, looking back, I love George Harrison. I like his solo stuff probably better than anyone else's. But I'm a big Paul McCartney guy. I mean, if you really look back at the Beatles and you look back at, the songwriting, I mean, Paul is just unbelievable. Some of my favorite songs, like Blackbird and Penny Lane, but I think my all-time favorite is a John song, Strawberry Fields Forever. But why am I talking about the Beatles? Well, we're doing our conspiracy theory segment, and there are a lot of conspiracy theories that revolve around the Beatles. There's, Satanism, there's drug stuff, you know. I was listening to Sgt. Pepper's, and the music gets a little funky, and there they definitely were playing around with stuff. And I think we'll hear in a minute, they kind of have a history of playing with their audience a little bit. But yeah, so Paul's my favorite, and I've always sort of heard of this conspiracy theory that Paul was actually dead and replaced. And so I thought we'd dive into this one. Nobody really knows exactly how the theory started. The first time it appears in print is in the February 1967 issue of the Beatles Book Monthly. And there was just a paragraph, and the paragraph just says, Paul isn't dead, basically. So despite any rumors you may have seen, Paul's not dead. It's like 2 or 3 sentences.
Right.
This is in 1967. Then you don't really hear anything else about it until 1969. So what happened was there's a guy named Fred Laber who was a student at the University of Michigan, and he heard a radio program, and there was a DJ from Detroit, and he's playing Beatles songs, and he's taking phone calls. And during this program, he starts taking all these calls from listeners who start talking about why they think Paul is dead. So the next day, Fred Laber is about to write a review of, I'm actually not sure which of the Beatles albums it was, but he was going to write a review of a Beatles album. And he ended up putting together an article that said, Paul is dead. You didn't know this, but here's what happened. And in the article, he pretty much lays out the conspiracy theory that we're going to get into. So here are the basics of it.
All right.
After an argument during a recording session in 1966 on November 9th, Paul left. He was angry. He left the recording studio. Maybe Yoko was there, actually.
Probably.
And he ended up crashing his car and getting decapitated when he lost control of the car. So at this point, they had to sort of hide this, and MI5, which is like, I guess, the FBI or the CIA of England, advised the Beatles to find a replacement and said, look, you guys are so huge, Paul just can't be dead. Right. There's going to be civil unrest. There may be mass suicides. So we got to get around this. And also, of course, there's financial gain to be had. I mean, the Beatles are the biggest thing going. So the band held a Paul McCartney lookalike contest where a Scottish orphan named William Shears Campbell won. And the name Shears may ring a bell. It's also Billy Shears.
I was about to say, it sounds like Billy Shears' proper name.
That's right. William Shears Campbell, a.k.a. Bill Shears, or Billy Shears won. So they taught Billy all the Beatles songs, and he had plastic surgery done to look like Paul. Now, they were in the middle of recording Sgt. Pepper's, and they had stopped touring for good at that point. And that's one thing I don't think I'd realized. You talked about documentaries. There is a documentary by, I want to say, Martin Scorsese, and it's called like The Touring Years, and it basically takes it has footage from when the Beatles toured up till their last show they did, which is really fascinating. I didn't realize like they basically were like, all right, we're good, we're done touring, and we're just going to make albums now. Or also crazy when you look to see all the Beatles albums were like created in like 3 years or something, or less. It might be it's crazy, just crazy. So getting back to the conspiracy theory, they're recording Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, the album. And this is where you start seeing clues. So here I'm not going to go through every single clue. I'm going to hit on the ones that I thought were sort of interesting.
Okay.
And then we'll kind of come to a conclusion on what we think. So I guess before I go down these, are there any clues, or like if you think about Paul is Dead, I'm sure you've heard this before. What do you think of? I
think of the Abbey Road cover. And I think that there were some songs where like references to Paul being dead were hidden, like played backwards, or some sort of like cryptic side quote during the middle of a song.
Right. So let's start with Sgt. Pepper. Okay. Let's think about the album cover. Now here we go. So it resembles a funeral. So you have the Beatles standing there in whatever garb they are. There's fresh dirt beneath them, and Paul is standing in the middle, and everyone is sort of turned toward him. And if you look, there's a person behind Paul with holding an open palm over his head, which according to Eastern mysticism signifies death. May have something to do with assassins marking their...
It could be.
I don't know if that's really Eastern. Actually, it's not. But anyway, if you also look, Paul is the only member with a black instrument, which of course black signifies death. Now here's where it starts to get kind of weird. If you hold a mirror to the middle of the drum, it'll spell out, and you kind of have to see this. It spells out November 9th, he die, kind of. And I'll let you sort of look at that. But it spells out the date there, and then it says he die. At the bottom of the cover, like I mentioned, it looks like a freshly dug grave, and there's a left-handed guitar underneath, what clearly looks like the shape of a left-handed guitar. Paul's the only lefty in the band, so that would have to be his. And if you look at the flowers in the dirt, they look like they spell out Paul with a question mark. So the idea here, by the way, is why would they do this?
Yeah.
Well, there are theories that Capitol Records was making them do this, and the Beatles, the rest of the remaining Beatles, kind of felt guilty, and so they were trying to sneak to their fans to say, like, to let them know that Paul was dead, and they had to do it in these subtle ways that it wouldn't get picked up. Yeah, very, very subtle. So then when you open Sgt. Pepper's, the record, you'll see a picture of the Beatles. Paul has a jacket, and on the jacket there's a patch, and the patch says OPD, which stands for, in England, officially pronounced dead, sort of like our DOA. Okay. So that's kind of creepy. So you've got this dirt, you've got a left-handed guitar, and then you have this OPD officially pronounced dead. On the back of the album, Paul is the only one with his back to the camera. George's finger is pointing to a lyric from She's Leaving Home, which says Wednesday morning at 5 a.m., which is supposedly the time of Paul's death. And what's crazy is November 9th, which is the day he was supposed to have died, falls on a Wednesday. So Wednesday morning at 5 a.m. So you got George's finger pointing to it. You've got Paul with his back to the camera, if you will. And then, of course, Billy Shears, as we know, who's the Scottish Orphan, he's featured throughout the character of Billy Shears.
That's right.
Is featured throughout the album. Day in the Life, it says he blew his mind out in a car, and Paul
losing his head,
lost his head, right? So then you move on to Magical Mystery Tour. Again, Paul is the only one dressed in black, and he's got a crucifixion pose if you look at it, which is kind of creepy. Beatles is spelled out in stars. If you can picture the cover of a Magical Mystery Tour, Beatles is spelled out in stars. If you turn the album upside down, you get a phone number. And fans, now it takes some squinting to see a phone number,
right?
Because I looked at this, but you can make it out. And according to fans, they called that number, and they would either get a cryptic message if they called at 5 a.m. on Wednesday morning, or you'd actually get Billy Shears would actually pick up the phone. Lots and lots of clues in the booklet for Magical Mystery Tour, which I won't go into them all, but there's a lot of hands over Paul's head in different pictures going back to this Eastern mysticism. And then the phrase, I was, is in front of him in a picture. So it's all these little subtle, very subtle clues, as you said. So the thing is, like, it sounds like it's very, very subtle. This can't be real. But when this is presented in a certain way and you start to, it's like the confirmation bias thing. If you really want to believe that Paul is dead,
right,
and you start seeing, well, why is there a hand over his head in every picture?
Right.
What's up with the dirt with his guitar? I mean, it starts to kind of add up.
Especially if you've had a little bit of hashish. That might help, bring it out, especially that album cover.
Exactly. So a couple more here. If you listen to, going back to Magical Mystery Tour, one other picture is all the Beatles. There's a photo of all the Beatles that have suits on and ties with boutonnieres. It looks like they're at a wedding. The other three Beatles have red flowers. Paul has a black flower. I mean, again, it is kind of weird. You're like, what is up? Are they purposefully trying to make people think this? If you listen to I Am the Walrus, now here's where the backmasking comes in.
Okay.
The first one is when you listen to I Am the Walrus, there's a point in the song where there's just a bunch of different sounds and voices buried in the mix. And actually, I apologize. Well, this part isn't backwards. You can hear, speaking of Shakespeare, there's a recitation of the death of Oswald from King Lear. If you then play that backwards, you can hear Paul is dead. Ha ha. Which I'm going to play right now. So, I mean, if you're listening for Paul is dead, ha ha, it does sound like that's what he's saying. More circumstantial evidence. On Strawberry Fields Forever, you can hear, and you may have heard this one. This one was kind of famous. You can hear what sounds like John saying, I buried Paul. And it does sound like I buried Paul.
Right.
Have you heard that one?
I have heard that one, and I always figured that was a message he was sending to Yoko.
Okay, so let's move on to the song I'm So Tired. And this is on the White Album. And by the way, I'm skipping over a lot, just so you know, but it's kind of important to go through these so you see how these sort of add up. These are some big ones. If you play the end of I'm So Tired backwards, you hear Paul is dead, man. Miss him, miss him. And again, it really sounds like it. You want to hear it? Here it goes. Okay, so then this is probably the one that people point to the most, which is the beginning of Revolution number 9. Put that on backwards, and it very clearly says, turn me on, dead man. Okay, I'm going to skip over a couple, and we're going to go to Abbey Road. Cover of Abbey Road. This is the one that I had also heard about. The guys look like they're walking away from a cemetery. John's leading the procession. He's dressed in white, and he kind of has a Christ-like look to him, which is not by accident. Right. Going back to your love of John. Ringo's wearing all black, like he's an undertaker. Then Paul, who's out of step with the rest of them and barefoot, is carrying a cigarette with his right hand, but we know the real Paul is a lefty, so that's weird. And the fact that he's not wearing his shoes, and if you go through a lot of pictures, he's very rarely wearing shoes, which I don't know. They say maybe signifies a corpse or something. There's some signal there.
Right.
Obviously a stretch. And then I will laugh at this because as I was reading this, they said, and then George is wearing denim, which means he's the gravedigger. Apparently, that's what gravediggers wear. Yeah. But here's the one that actually does make you pause, which is there's a license plate. If you look at the cover of Abbey Road and you see the license plate, there's a Volkswagen Beetle and it says 28IF, so 28 if. What this signifies is that Paul would be 28 if he were still alive, and the math does add up. So 28 if, he would be 28 if he was alive. So, okay, how was Paul taking all this, right? So initially, Paul was like, ignored it. This is going to just, he's freaking Paul McCartney in the Beatles.
He's got other stuff to do.
Yeah, it's like, he's not going to pay as much attention to him, but it just gets more and more nagging. And the press is, of course, all over this. So he doesn't like the fact that like the press is trying to like get even more pictures of him than normal. They're not flattering. And he says, let me just go on the record with Life magazine. And so he went on the record with Life magazine, did a big article. The cover is he and his wife and kid. And it's like really establishing, I'm not dead. I'm here. I mean, that wasn't the whole point of the article, but it was a part of it. This thing had like steamrolled sort of. And so the wild thing about that is even that wasn't enough to make conspiracy theorists go, Paul's alive. Because if you pick up, I'm feeling nuts as I say all this. If you pick up the magazine and you hold it to the light, the other side of the first page is a Mercury car ad. And the Mercury car is going right through Paul's head. So it's like, even then they're like, no, it's still, it's somehow they got together. They're telling us that Paul really is dead. So why was this conspiracy so powerful? I think it's because Capitol Records really wanted to play into this as well. And this is all, I don't know this, they deny it. But one of the things that kind of makes sense is people got really curious about this. People would play the records backwards. It would destroy the record and they'd have to buy a new one. So it did drive up sales. It drove up curiosity. And it was really interesting. So I'm going to stop there and then I want to get, what do you think? So what do you think is Paul? Because to me, it seems insane that anyone would actually think this one is real. Like I think New Coke was fake or whatever. I believe some of these I'm like, I can get down with. This is just crazy. Especially now, the fact that you look at him now, I mean, that's Paul McCartney. Like, could anybody still believe this?
There were not plastic surgeons in that day.
Exactly.
That could pull something off, especially with a man as handsome and good looking. And the guy's still got it going on.
And given the talent of Paul McCartney, by the way.
Exactly.
And no Scottish accent. He was a Scottish.
Or maybe that Billy Shears is just a master. Maybe
maybe
he's an assassin. Maybe he killed him and replaced him. No, I've never thought this could even be plausible. I agree with what you were saying that once it's probably got out, I think a smart record company would go, you know what, Paul, take your shoes off on this shoot, and we're gonna put a 28 if to kind of keep that going on a little bit more. It reminds me of a story when Alice Cooper performed when his band just started out, and they accidentally destroyed they threw a chicken up on stage and ended up being torn up by the crowd. And of course that blossomed into Alice Cooper, ate a chicken live on stage.
And he's like, great.
And Frank Zappa told him, don't say anything. Basically let that rumor get out there. That's great. And I think mythos kind of runs with things, especially in a pre-internet, you're getting Life magazine to prove that you're alive age.
Right. Well, do you remember records just kind of staring at we're old enough to remember records when we were kids. And you just sort of would stare at those pictures.
Right.
Because it was, what else are you going to do? Playing dirt? Or, it's like, I'm going to look at everything. So the other thing I didn't mention was this got really popularized through college campuses. So this guy had written about it at University of Michigan, this Fred Labor guy. So I can sit here and I actually have them all written down, but I'm not going to do it. I could sit here and debunk almost every single one of these. A couple of the interesting ones are just the fact that OPD, remember, officially pronounced dead. It actually was if you could see the whole thing as OPP, which not that OPP, but the Ontario Provincial Police. The other one is John Lennon, when he was supposedly saying, "I buried Paul." You can hear other takes on the anthology version, and he's clearly saying cranberry sauce. So, and you're like, oh, cranberry sauce. But it's your mind tells you you're hearing "I buried Paul." The one that nobody really gets is the whole "Turn Me On, Dead Man." There's no explanation for that one. They're probably just messing with us. So, again, my conclusion on this one, I could go down and all those little clues, you put them all together. I'm sure it was fun back in the day, and it's kind of fun to talk about. But I think that, it's obvious that Paul McCartney is alive, and I actually wrote in my notes, nobody was doing that good of a plastic surgery back then. I do think that this is an example of how, if you have an idea in your head, you can see clues all around and get sucked in. Some of the other ones we talked about, it's the same with QAnon or something like that. It's like, oh God, it's all fitting together, but it's nothing really there.
But I tell you, this one has legs because as you mentioned this to me, it reminded me of a story my wife told me that within the last few years, she was at a chiropractor who, as he was doing his back cracking, was having a conversation with someone else and discussed how he believed fake Paul was still there. This was just kind of like a thing.
I can't believe that. Really?
Well, I can't. Well, it's a chiropractor, so I guess I can believe that. And, sometimes people will, despite facts that are in their face, people will believe what they want to believe and find stupid people to tell them things and to listen to them.
I guess because this one is just so not true, but I think the legacy of this one, though, is backmasking or backward record playing.
Right. So
much more to get into on that. Maybe we'll do that in another episode of They Walk Among Us.
They Walk Among Us.
So one of the other big reasons I wanted to discuss Assassination is it gives me an excuse to discuss one of my favorite book series of all time.
Oh.
So, we have discussed Shakespeare earlier. This is not Shakespeare, but is actually a book series that I got into a few years ago and just devoured. A book series called The Destroyer that in the mid-'80s was made into a movie called Remo Williams, The Adventure Begins. So so this was a movie I saw as a kid and I liked it. And as by the grandiose title of The Adventure Begins, you'd expect that there would be more adventures afterwards. So the movie did not, I seem to enjoy it more than most people did. But I still enjoy it. And actually, I think I've recommended you at certain points.
Yeah.
And again, it's not a masterpiece, but it's pretty good. But I was inspired by an article on avclub.com a few years ago where the author bought a huge box of these books, and they are paperback books. They're about 200 pages long. The Destroyer book series started in the early 1970s and has gone into hundreds of, almost 200, I believe, books. So, and I think it still continues today in some form. It was written by two authors, Warren Murphy and Richard Sapir. Warren Murphy, I think, was more the driving force and stayed with the book series longer. But it surrounds, it's about a story about an assassin, by the name of Remo Williams. He is a police officer who's an orphan, whose death is faked because he's being recruited by an agency called Cure. There's an agency that does not exist. And their job is to basically... they are authorized by President Kennedy and to take care of things that needed to happen outside the law. Remo is trained to be an assassin by one of my favorite all-time literary characters, and I'm not joking with this, Chun, a deadly assassin known as the Master of Shinanju. So I mentioned earlier that there would be a mythical martial art from Korea, and that is Shinanju.
Shinanju, is that like, oh gosh, what, Gymkata?
It could be. It could be a derivative of that. So according to the mythos of the Destroyer series, Shinanju is the martial art from which all other martial arts come from.
It does sound like a cool, so this is purely made up for the books, right?
Hopefully. Or maybe not.
It's the name is so good. Like like if I was going to, especially if I was like 13 and I was going to make up a new, and I'm not trying to talk, I know this is like your favorite fictional character and everything. If I was going to make up a new fighting style, Shinanju or whatever, that's pretty good.
Right. So the books basically every book, Remo and Chun are dispatched on an assignment and as assassins to take out people. And there's a quote from the Remo Williams movie where Chun says that assassination is the highest form of public service, which I think in the right hands could be.
Absolutely.
So part of the gimmick of the book is that they don't execute people with weapons. They need to be secret assassinations.
So it's all bare hands.
It's all bare hand stuff. And what was cool too is this book came out at a time where there were a lot of things called, I believe, men's adventure books. Mm-hmm. And there are other types of, one that comes to mind, something called Mac Bolan. Like you would see it like at 7-Elevens or drugstores.
Right.
That were really gory and violent and full of sex.
Right.
And one of the reasons I love these books is the sense of humor they have in it. Mm-hmm. Is that there's not a lot, because the people are executed by hand, there's not a lot of gore.
Yeah.
Chun teaches Remo how to have sex as an assassin and takes all the fun out of it. So basically, makes all the sex scenes absolutely terrible on purpose.
That's awesome.
More about Chun. Chun is the deadliest assassin that's ever lived. He's from the island of Shinanju, and he's the last master of Shinanju. One of the things I love about this character, too, is that he is obsessed with soap operas. He says it's one contribution American culture has made.
That's good.
And during the series, he actually meets his idol, Rad Rex, at one point. And Chun also is one of
Rad Rex
is one of the most racist characters that has ever been written into a book.
Oh.
And not he being a racist depiction.
Yeah.
He is racist. Oh. And it's one of the funny things about the book is that Chun despises absolutely everyone and everything. And it's an incredibly politically incorrect book.
Okay.
To give a little hint of Chun's thoughts on things. He was describing in one book when God created man. Mm-hmm. And I'll skip what he says about white people and black people and get to, and again, I'm quoting here, when God created the yellow man.
Mm.
Quoting from Chun. And then to this man in whom he was pleased, he gave a mind. To the Chinese, he gave lust and dishonesty.
Oh,
to the Japanese, he gave arrogance and greed. To the Koreans, he gave honesty, courage, integrity, discipline, beauty of thought, heart, and wisdom.
Okay, so he's Korean then.
Yes, he is Korean. And I'm probably not explaining it as well, but these books are hilarious. There's been talks of it being remade into a movie or made as, I think it would be very good as a series. Incredibly politically incorrect. I don't see how it could work. One of the things about the movie that was a little bit controversial even then is Chun was portrayed by Joel Grey, the Broadway actor, famous for Cabaret, father of Jennifer Grey from Dirty Dancing.
Yeah.
And basically, I think the term would be yellowface, that they would call it.
Right.
They did a pilot for a TV show several years ago, and Roddy McDowall took Chun's spot there.
That's cool.
So it'd be interesting to see. I don't see, frankly, how they could make it. And I thought about just different quotes from Chun to list that would not be, well, would probably somehow get us canceled there. But I'll leave with Assassination. If you're interested, just fun reads that would probably take you a day to get through. Go to eBay. You can find a big old box of these. Come to my house. I have I took the inspiration from AV Club, and I bought my own box. So I have about 100 of these books at my house, hidden by my wife, who made sure it was like, we weren't going to put these in the family library downstairs.
Right.
And just to leave you with Chun's, in several of the books and actually audiobooks, Chun will come in and actually give his true commentary on what happened. The first audiobook version of this I bought after the author's introduction. There was Chun's edit to that, where he actually told the truth, which he concludes with his conclusion is, with moderate toleration for you, is his version of saying sincerely when he signs off. So Remo Williams, The Adventure Begins, decent movie. You should watch it.
Awesome.
So as we get to wrap up, can't talk about assassinations without talking about some prominent ones.
Yeah.
So not to say if you have a favorite assassination, but when I say assassination, what are some things that maybe jump out to you?
I'll tell you what jumps out to me is, because like you said, assassinations aren't happy things usually. I think about Fidel Castro and all of the sort of, Roadrunner type ways they tried to kill him. And I remember, I don't know if these are all true, but I know that the legend is that the CIA tried numerous ways to kill Fidel Castro, including an exploding cigar, which is awesome. And the thing that is weird about this is how it seems like nothing worked. So they kept trying to do new things. They had apparently a seashell they tried to to have explosives. Again, this is all very like Bugs Bunny. A contaminated diving suit. I think they had a woman that they kind of like James Bond style. They tried to sneak in and have her like slip him cyanide or something. So I would say my favorite assassination attempts anyway had to do with Fidel Castro. Yeah. What about you?
I wouldn't, again, not saying this is a favorite, but one I find very interesting and something I've discussed before, but haven't discussed in a while, is the assassination of Abraham Lincoln.
Yeah.
And I highly recommend if you're ever in Washington, D.C., go to Ford's Theater, go on the tour. The last time my family went, my wife gave the tour guide a hug at the end because she did such a good job of just bringing you back to that time and performing, and to be in a historic place, to be, I mean, you can see where it happened and imagine that night, and it's described to you, and it's very just to be that close to history. Is something that always, if you get a chance, you should do that.
I will. And didn't you say too that in a past episode that you saw a guy that was wearing like a hat, like commemorating the assassination attempt of?
I think it's at Ford's.
Not attempt. My bad.
Yeah. Or was it? Was it Billy Shears there taking?
It could have been
in his place.
What did it say though?
History is fun.
Okay. Yeah. Well, history is fun, but Abraham Lincoln getting killed isn't fun. But I know what you mean. Having that connection to history is pretty darn cool. So, all right. Well, Steve, thank you. This has been fascinating. I had no idea that Assassin could carry a whole episode, but it did. We did go on a journey. So thank you for that. And we'd also like to thank everyone that's listening right now. If you wouldn't mind, give us a 5-star rating on the Apple Podcast. Make sure you follow us on Spotify and all those things. We really appreciate it. Steve, Bob's your uncle.
Watch out for bears and hail is from the devil.
Speaksies.